Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything. Geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Porkins Policy Radio. As always, I am your host, Pierce Redmond, and you can find this show here at American Freedom Radio, AmericanFreedomRadio.com, as well as on my website, which is PorkinsPolicyReview.com. And if you are new to the show, you can subscribe via RSS on iTunes, YouTube, by email, a whole bunch of different ways to subscribe and to listen to the show, and more on the way. Once I finally do that, I know I've been talking about that for a little while, but more on the way in terms of different podcatchers. Quick couple of updates before we jump into today's show. So this coming Thursday is my birthday, so things have been moving a little bit slower than I wanted to, and I've got a bunch of other kind of little projects I'm trying to finish, and I personally hate my birthday, so I always get a little sluggish and kind of depressed, in the days leading up to it. So I know I keep saying it, I sound like a broken record, but I'll be sending out more of the journal soon. Believe me, I want to get rid of them now because they're just this thing taking up space in my apartment. So I will be sending those out, and I will also be posting the subscriber podcast probably by Thursday at the very latest, but hopefully by Wednesday. So I will be posting that. I spoke with Ed Opperman, very fun episode that we recorded last week that I will finally be getting to posting this week, and some good episodes on the horizon as well, that maybe we'll talk about a little bit more next week. But anyway, today we are joined by a good friend of the show, frequent guest, Robbie Martin. We're going to be discussing a whole host of sort of current events and news topics and things like that. But before we dive in, Robbie, how are you?
I'm doing great, Pierce. How are you?
Pretty good. Like I said, I'm not, are you a big birthday guy? I gotta say I fucking hate my birthday, and I hate the whole process of like a birthday.
Not really, to be honest, no. No.
No.
The feeling of hurtling towards my death even sooner is not a great one. But, yeah, I mean, it varies. Some years I get depressed, other years I'm just like, whatever. I mean, it's, it is what it is. Yeah.
No, it's just a day. Yeah, I don't know what it is. I mean, I do know exactly kind of what it is, but anyway, enough about, how much I dislike my birthday. So Robbie, you and I wanted to, like I said, we wanted to talk about a bunch of different topics and things, but I guess the first one that I sort of wanted us to sort of explore a little bit is the first 100 days of Trump in office. Trump has passed this magical 100 days in office, which the media and the political class and the pundits and stuff, they put a lot of emphasis on the first 100 days of anybody's any presidential president, their first 100 days, which is kind of silly because, it's, you can't really do all that much I mean, you can do a lot in 100 days, but they put a lot of emphasis on it, so people have been kind of, talking about it and, the countdown and all that sort of stuff. And I guess quite a lot has happened during, this 100 days, or I guess 100 plus at this point. But, Robbie, what's your kind of initial take on Trump 100 days older, so to speak?
Well, at first I was kind of like, I mean, there is definitely something to this sort of the PR framing of the first 100 days with Trump that I think is more important to look at than previous presidents, because obviously Trump is a businessman, he's a salesman, he understands those skills, the public relations, side of that. And I guess one of the weirdest things to me was it wasn't just this idea that he was escalating all these neocon-style military escalations so recently. It was that he was doing it right at the end of his first 100 days. Almost as if he knew that this heat, you know, however you want to describe it, a lot of people think it's the deep state. I don't agree with that necessarily, but there's a lot of heat coming at him in his office of the presidency from all sides. You know, you have the Russia collusion heat. You have, this other heat that's a little lower down, which is like the Sebastian Gorka, like this possible white supremacy, element of his administration that was getting heat. So all this heat just seemed to be rising and rising, and then all of a sudden, literally within the last 2 weeks of this first 100-day window, he starts doing all these things that were completely counter to his sort of part of his campaign platform, which was that he was, he didn't say it as I'm an anti-interventionist, but he did play on that sort of Ron Paul, Rand Paul, libertarian anti-interventionist rhetoric. And I guess the weirdest thing to me is that he would do it. There's no other explanation I can think of why he would have done all this stuff right at the end of this 100-day window, unless he is such a narcissist and an egomaniac that he wanted his image to be able to turn around, even if it was just slightly, in those first 100 days. Almost like a last-minute decision to sort of open the door to, all these things that basically, and we've seen that the media, mainstream media, seems to really like that he's doing. Like, especially the bombing in Syria was one that, for a lot of mainstream media pundits, that turned him from this despised, puppet of Putin into all of a sudden now he's a real president now. Like, this is the president we wanted to see, kind of a thing. And that's all very frightening, but it's also even frightening that Trump would escalate and be playing with fire to this degree. If I'm right, if he is doing this to, solidify his place in history, this is with his first 100 days, that he'd be doing that just for that reason. I mean, obviously there are other reasons he's doing it, but to do it all in that small of a time frame, right before his 100 days gets sort of capped off, is very unusual to me. But I mean, at the same time, Reagan started off kind of similar to Trump, and then he went full neocon. So it's I can't, there's a lot of speculation that I'm doing here, but I mean, there was definitely a decision made to sort of, put the train on a different track, right before his first 100 days were up.
Well, I wonder too if there isn't an element of Washington D.C. is such a bubble. And everyone is sort of, in this bubble, and they're all sort of obsessed and nitpicking every little thing. But the first 100 days is like overload. They're way more particular about things. They're paying much closer attention in those first 100 days. And not that they sort of, after the 100 days they kind of take a break, but the pressure is not quite as intense as those first 100 days. So, I wonder if it wasn't also just sort of, as you were saying before, Trump is very vain. He's obsessed with the media image of himself. So maybe, in this first 100 days, let me just give it all I've got, kind of throw everything against the wall and see what kind of happens. But it is, and I wonder too if when the attention is slightly less on his administration, in the sense of like we're counting the days, the hours of the Trump presidency, that maybe he won't, have a little bit more wiggle room. Although this is supposing that Trump really is as smart as he claims to be, and I don't know if that's really the case here. The reversal on so many different things is also shocking. NATO, Syria, China, Janet Yellen, the Fed, to an extent healthcare, because they really haven't done anything on that, and they're not going to. And just, recently, the opioid crisis. He's now, cutting, government money going to, I forget exactly, but, drug enforcement and things, and not that pouring money into some government agency is going to stop the opioid addiction, but that is the perception amongst his supporters and things like that. And we saw a lot of them jumping onto social media and the internet to denounce and distance themselves from Trump. And I want to get your take on this, Rob, because there's like the two sort of schools of thought when this all kind of started to happen, that they secretly knew that this was going to happen, and suddenly all of these, hardcore supporters and people that were, swayed by the power of Trump and that he really was, suddenly they were all kind of, oh, well, we knew he was really, this is what was going to happen. We were just being overly optimistic, but, I'm not really let down because I knew this all along secretly. I just didn't want to say anything. And then there are the people who genuinely seem, shocked to find that gambling is going on here. And they feel like they were taken for a ride and suddenly now they're back to voting doesn't matter. But what did you make of that sort of, moment, like on social media where you saw all these people going there? Cause I think you and I were talking about this like months ago, that eventually this would all kind of start to fall apart. And it would be very interesting to see how people kind of, dealt with this. And it seems like now they're just kind of, attacking Trump opponents, but are just sort of quiet on Trump. So they're not defending him, and the fact that he wants to bomb Syria, but they're just sort of not, pointing it out. It's still, but it's still, Clinton is still the real bad guy. And, Clinton is really after, Trump and we got to fight Clinton. So
or where were you when Obama was doing X, Y, and Z?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Well, Obama's not president anymore. I don't know if you got the memo, but he's not president. So
yeah,
it's about, if you oppose those policies in Obama, you should also oppose them under Trump and stop whining, because most of the people they accuse of that are people who have remained consistent and criticize imperialism and foreign policy. But you do bring up an interesting point. I had this hope that there were enough savvy, smart, really aggressive people in the alt-right. I already sound like an idiot even saying it that way, but that there were people whose passion for their beliefs would transcend their loyalty for Trump. And I do think that that's true on a certain level, but that doesn't exist in a vacuum, because what's happening is the alt-right in general, which I see as like the most powerful engine of Trump's base. I don't know if you would agree with that, but just the alt-right movement has done a wonderful job of defining almost their entire movement, not really even on Trump, but on hatred of the left and liberals. Yeah. But they conflate all of the left side of the spectrum as leftists. That's something that, even InfoWars has adopted. You'll see InfoWars articles running now calling Raw Story and Salon, two of the most generic neoliberal outlets there are, calling them leftist media outlets, acting like they're Counterpunch or something. It's like, what? So this is the alt-right. I think that it doesn't matter if Trump disappoints them on foreign policy, because ultimately their hatred towards Trump's opponents, everyone on the left side of the spectrum, is more of a priority for them than anything like having to do with foreign policy. Because you have to remember, not you, but just people in general have to remember that this talking point of right-wing anti-interventionism, I think it originated during, well, you can even take it back further than this, but I'll start with the sort of Tea Party pushback against the Afghanistan war surge. And that, in reality, if you really look back at that, it was political opportunism. It was sort of a form of economic nationalism. Rand Paul sort of ran with it, and I'm sure on some level he was, politicking a little bit, like his father. Say whatever you want about his father, but when you hear him talk about anti-war, on the House floor back in the day, it was very much coming from a place of morality primarily, and then economics sort of secondarily. But what the right-wing sort of Tea Party establishment did is they turned they played on the economic nationalism, this fears of our economy collapsing, and inserted the fact that Obama was sending, I think, 70,000 more troops to Afghanistan into that as a reason why we shouldn't intervene in Afghanistan more, is because it's a waste of money and energy and like our country's resources, not because it was morally wrong to do so. So I think you're seeing the same thing in Syria, for example, now, where none of these alt-right people complain ever when we're bombing, basically carpet bombing ISIS territories in Syria. That's not the issue for them. Their issue is very narrowly focused on this idea that, they want Assad to stay in power, and they don't want the U.S. to intervene in Syria and overthrow Assad's government, which I more or less agree with that point of view by itself. But I think that there's really they don't have anti-war principles in a real sense. They're not anti-imperialism, they're not anti-war. So when Trump is doing all these horrible things to escalate war, and even just basically landing us into a new conflict like with North Korea, completely out of the blue, they don't really have any framework or ideology to make them super disappointed in that. Like, it's not I ultimately don't think to them it's that big of a deal. And you'll see, you've probably seen it. Now the word neocon is super popular in the alt-right. They use the word constantly, but then you see this other aspect happening, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, or we could talk about a little bit now, is this idea of the alt-right continually moving the goalposts to other people who are to blame in the Trump administration for disappointing them. So first it was Reince Priebus. He's the one making Trump do these bad things. He's a generic rhino. He's a, Republican, generic Republican, and like Paul Ryan's trying to sabotage him. Reince Priebus sabotaged the healthcare bill. And then you started to see when the Syria thing happened, it was kind of like that strategy of the alt-right and Trump's defenders sort of went into all these different directions. So then it became, Ivanka Trump is to blame. She tugged at her dad's heartstrings to bomb Syria. And then it was, Jared Kushner is actually a globalist and a Zionist, which everybody already knew. Going into this, he was a Zionist. That's not a secret. So all of a sudden he becomes a Zionist who's making Trump do Zionist things. And then all of a sudden, people like Mike Cernovich are writing articles, supposedly from actual White House leaks, saying that no, the neocon, Trump is not turning into a neocon. He's not going along with this neocon stuff. Is that McMaster is a neocon to replace Flynn, who's sort of strong-arming Trump and actually tricking him into bombing Syria by feeding him false intelligence. So you see it in all these different forms. This is how. And I think that that's almost like it's a desperate way for them to cling on to their narrative still. That ultimately Trump is still okay in their eyes. It's just all these other people in his administration who are somehow controlling things. So what does that really say about Trump?
That argument is so bogus, because it really is like, so McMaster shows him phony intelligence and he buys it, so he's an idiot. He's the first person to ever have, it's sort of like if you were in his shoes, would you not question this? I loved the people and I want to get deep into Cernovich a little bit later, but, he was with all these hashtags, I didn't vote for Kushner. Yes, you did. When you voted for Trump, you voted for his son-in-law because you knew that Ivanka was, there was no way she wasn't going to be part of that administration.
Exactly.
She's always been at his side. Look at his businesses. Look at, he led his two idiot sons. Almost just sort of, had very little contact with them. Obviously the Apprentice kind of changed that a bit, but even so, it was always Ivanka that was his, confidant in all these things. So yes, you did vote for her and for Jared Kushner. And I know it's like, what were these, you didn't know Kushner was a globalist. You didn't know he had connections to George Soros and those things. But, going back to what you were just saying there before, Robbie, because this is what I find so fascinating, is that, these people aren't really running away from him. they're still, like, that was, some of them have, and I was disappointed at some of the people I saw that I, at one point, had some, a sliver of respect left for them, and then they kind of jumped on the Trump bandwagon, and then, instantly were, he's no better, he's just like everybody else, I was always right all along, it doesn't matter to vote, forget that I ever encouraged you to vote for him. But for the most part, everyone is still kind of making excuses, and that's so fascinating that the alt-right as a movement is kind of sticking here, and that they're more obsessed with attacking the ever-growing leftist movement that wants to take over the world. That's a more concern than, oh, wait a minute, so this guy that you were saying was going to, drain the swamp and do all the, he's like all these other leftists, really. He's towing the same line. So, I mean, what do you make of that these people are just still, it's almost like, I mean, the alt-right is more and more being, anointed into the Republican Party. Even if they don't want to admit it, they are becoming more and more, quote unquote, mainstreamed. They are, they're a part of the fabric of society. Whether we like it or not, they are, and they're not going anywhere, and they're kind of continuing. And that to me is interesting from a political standpoint, because I really thought that a lot of these people were gonna, wake up from this malaise and realize, oh, I just voted for the white nationalist Obama. I fucked up. But they didn't. They're still kind of like, no, he's good. He's just, he's surrounded by people that are manipulating him. Well, then he's weak, okay? I mean, for all of his, macho behavior and, the way he always, when he sits in a chair, he's always got to lean forward so he's, over you. Always standing, when, if someone else is sitting. He's a wimp. He's a pushover. What do you make of that?
Well, it's interesting because if you think back to the last two administrations, at a certain point, the public narrative about them became a similar flavor. I mean, very quickly, it was George Bush was seen as a weakling who wasn't actually in charge, and that Cheney was really in charge. So, the question needs to be asked: does that somehow benefit an administration to create that kind of narrative? That ultimately the president isn't really in charge and that he's being, pushed around by all these different people. I mean, I guess that's a question worth asking, but I think the more important parallel that's happening here that I see is that during the Bush administration, you had an entire flank of basically pro-Bush media that was running cover and directly piping in propaganda from the White House to the masses, that was the neoconservative movement, at the time. Along with like the more for the public, version of it, which was like Fox News and the New York Post and New York Daily News and, the Daily Mirror, basically Rupert Murdoch's entire media empire, all the way from the intellectual neocon stuff to the really dumbed down, watered down neocon talking points. And the Bush administration was able to basically work that whole media empire as a secondary mouthpiece for them to get out whatever rhetoric they wanted to. And that also helped them spar with other aspects of the press that were being adversarial towards them, because they could just put out a counter narrative through essentially their own media apparatus. So what I think Steve Bannon has done in the Trump administration, he's a very savvy media guy. I mean, Breitbart, as horrible as I think it is, it's been incredibly successful in what their goals are, which is sort of, creating this different, capturing this more angry right-wing rhetoric, this more populism or whatever. I hate using that word to describe it. I don't like using it, but Bannon and Trump are working the alt-right media circuit in the same way that the Bush administration was working the neocon media circuit to put out their own counter-narratives. And also it's worth remembering that the alt-right media circuit is pretty much completely blended together now with what used to be sort of the truther movement, the conspiracy media movement, that side of the alternative media movement. So this is what I think is happening, is basically Bannon is utilizing, or other people in the Trump administration, I don't know if it's only Bannon, Trump seemed to be savvy at this as well, even before Bannon was part of his campaign. They're basically using the sort of conspiracy theories to take the heat away from Trump in their own way. That, Jared Kushner is a globalist. That McMaster is a secret neocon. And I think what you were describing is, why are they still holding on, clinging to this? How are they inventing all these narratives to keep making excuses for Trump? And I think it's for the same reason that Pizzagate kept growing at such an insane rate, where there is the alt-right are clever enough where it's like they can create conspiracy theories that they'll buy into. And that other people will buy into as well. And I'm not even saying that in a cynical way. I think that they actually believe, a lot of them actually believe in these theories. And it's sort of their bread and butter. It's like, there's something enticing about being able to construct all these alternate theories, about what's going on. I mean, it's the whole, you can boil it all down to like the whole idea that the mainstream media is all 100% fake and all these other media outlets are real, So, I mean, I guess that's what I think is happening here, is that the administration itself has found a way to basically propagandize the alt-right, to get them to maintain that core base for him in some way. Even if it means throwing a little bit of mud at Trump in the process, if it still maintains his core base, then the goal is achieved.
No, I completely agree, because again, what this to me really emphasizes, and this was something that I saw in the lead up to the election and then actually in the election then after, is that the other thing this has really done is just convince the right wing, but also the conspiracy culture, to love the government. That ultimately the government is good. The government is good as long as we get the right person, and Trump is the right person. And even though it's never worked previously, none of these politicians or leaders have ever really been the beacons of change and of alternative thinking. Once they get to any sort of position of power, of course they always fold. But somehow, and I think this is like the power of a person like Steve Bannon and also Trump in utilizing his public image to the extent that they still love the idea of a Trump government. That ultimately government is good as long as we get the right people in there, and we hang all the pedophiles, we hang all the neocons and the globalists and the Zionists and all these other undesirables. We can really make America great again. When in reality, I mean, it's this sort of brings me back to this whole question of has the deep state or the establishment really won out and taken control of Trump, or was he never not under their control already? They're still coming out on top, and Trump seems to be kind of fine with it. I mean, he'll bitch and moan about Obama and, some of this Russian stuff. And I want to get to this whole question of Russia. But, he seems more or less fine because, at the end of the day, his family is benefiting. There's all these, you'll see these news items where, Kushner family is going to benefit from, Trump's, visa, this and that, and, Ivanka's, shoe company getting supported by the State Department. These seem silly, but I think that's really what he's in it for. He's always been someone who wants access to wealth, mainly
Absolutely.
Because he's so bad at keeping it. He's got to keep pursuing wealth because he's always losing it because he's a terrible business person. So just to sort of kind of bring it back, I'll throw it to you, is this notion that the deep state is won over is complete, should be complete BS at this point, because they, of course Trump was always part of it, and he's going along with this. Why is he not speaking out? Why doesn't he sign a executive order releasing all the 9/11 documents? Wasn't he supposed to be doing that? And why are we? People seem shocked to find out that there are U.S. troops in Somalia. Yes, of course. And they're dying. I mean, that in and of itself would be front page news if this was Hillary Clinton. She, losing soldiers in Yemen and Somalia. But with Trump, it's just sort of par for the course. Nobody seems to be looking, again, as you said, foreign policy is non-existent now to these people. It doesn't really matter. Instead, it's just this continued fight against the leftists.
Exactly, yeah. Well, look at how many of these people who refer to Hillary Clinton as Killary, how many of them actually are that upset right now what Trump's doing? I mean, that's a question worth asking. I bet you very few of them are really that upset. They are ultimately more upset at the PC left, the SJWs. They think Antifa is more dangerous than the military-industrial complex. I mean, this is what these people actually believe. Their entire framework of ideology is a weird fantasy. It has no bearing in real reality. And I think that it's been intentionally designed to be that way by people like Steve Bannon and these other people who have captured this right-wing populism and steered it into these useful areas. But you brought up something funny earlier about all the brands that Trump's family is pushing now that he's still in office, which, I mean, let's just isolate that for a second. Like, my mom actually brought this up about a week ago, that why isn't that more of a controversy that Trump is actually profiting off being president? Like, what, shouldn't that be, isn't that an obvious, really easy to latch onto controversy? Like, his hotels are still open. I mean, I remember Democratic pundits before they went in full, paranoid Russia hysterical mode were asking the question, which is a totally valid question, what if Trump gets bribes or gives other countries bribes in the form of letting them use his hotel services or stay in his golf courses for free? And no one ever really answered that conflict of interest. I mean, it's very apparent that it's still there. And then also, how funny is it too that all these people who hated the Clinton dynasty and the Bush dynasty are okay with Trump essentially launching his own, obviously, political dynasty that's going to exist for decades to come. I mean, does anyone have any doubt that Ivanka Trump and Donald Trump Jr. are going to try to run for political office in the near future?
Yeah.
I mean, it's so obvious.
Kushner. I mean, look at Kushner and, it's, of course, and at least with the Clintons, there was just Chelsea, and I guess her daughter or son, I forget, but, he's got two idiot sons, a son-in-law, daughter, Tiffany, Barron, and the Kushner family alone, I mean, they're definitely, all of those people. This is a much larger, dynastic family that's sort of in the process of being developed here. And no, of course, I mean, where are these alt-right personalities on that? I mean, they could care less, I guess. I mean, that's the only thing that we can really kind of take away from this. And it really does shock me, and it's fascinating to just look at that. As you were saying, I mean, Antifa is the worst thing. And that always just kind of rubs me the wrong way. Because you see it on Twitter, and you and I, Robbie, we're always on Twitter. We see this all the time. But, you'll see these alt-right people, all complaining about the, anti-fascists, and you see the anti-fascist people, oh, look at these alt-right, blah, blah. And you have to just sit there and think that half the time, what are they really arguing about? They're pointing out that each other, the other group is filled with agent provocateurs. And it's yeah, they both are completely at this point. When you see these big clashes and protests, these are all undercover cops or, feds or private intelligence people. They're all there to start a fight. These people, a lot of people throwing punches and all that kind of stuff. They're there to instigate problems on both sides. So, they're so infiltrated at this point. So what are you even arguing about? I mean, this is, again, this should be one of those things that maybe unites, the better sections of the left and the right. That there are these people, that are run around with masks and, all clad in black and stuff. And you see that on both sides, you'll see these, Oath Keeper, fucking ex-cops and stuff, and they'll be in all the military fatigue and, all black like their private security, with AR-15s. And then you see these anti-fascists all in black with masks and, hurling bricks. It's that is where your focus is, essentially on a completely manipulated, controlled exercise, and in not on the fact that, as you said, how much is the Trump and Kushner family going to benefit economically, financially and politically from this, sack of shit in the White House? Probably a lot.
Yeah, they're going
Robbie,
to benefit immensely. Yeah.
No. I wanted to quickly, and then we'll kind of move on to the Russia stuff. But there was I don't know if you saw this. It just happened to be flipping around, and I kept it on. But CBS's John Dickerson, who gave he had this, I guess, a sort of famous interview a few weeks ago with Donald Trump, where he's sort of needling Trump on, I forget exactly what the question was, but Trump, would basically not give him a real answer, and then Trump basically said, "Okay, I'm done here, goodbye." And and he sits down, and John Dickerson has just sort of, I guess, walked out. But I know CBS, CIA and Dickerson is very mainstream, but this guy did, he spent more time with Trump than any of us ever have. So it is useful to see his sort of perspective on this. And he was speaking with Charlie Rose on this sort of thing, and Dickerson pondered if Trump really meant anything that he was saying in terms of the big policy stuff, like NATO, China, Syria, the Fed, opioids, all these things. Or if this was really all just a bargaining chip, that he knew he was never going to get any of this, so he just gave it all away. And that, again, presupposes that Trump really is the master negotiator, which is debatable at best. But it is interesting, in that, because either way, he's not fighting back for these things, Mm-hmm. He's not going to all of a sudden turn around and say, "Oh, we got to defund NATO." Don't give me this, he's being strong-armed or manipulated. He can speak out if he wants to. This is a man that can't, they can't stop him tweeting. He can start tweeting, I'm being controlled. The deep state is after me. I'm going to be assassinated, or blah, blah, blah. So what do you make of that? Was this a planned, or is this just or he just said, because the speed at which he reverses these things, it's like, so he really didn't mean any, he's not even pretending to fight for this. So what do you make of that?
Well, at first he seemed to have a lot of his surrogates, putting out rhetoric that was counter to what his campaign rhetoric was, like Nikki Haley, the UN ambassador, went really hard on Russia. And some of her first few appearances. And then most recently she went really hard on the UN itself, saying it's an anti-Israel club, basically, and that this needs to end. Simply because the UN is one of the best things that the UN has done is be able to point out the human rights abuses of Israel. And they've actually done that pretty consistently the last few years. And Obama, right before he left office, abstained from the vote of denouncing the new settlements in the UN, which was such a huge insult, to Israel from, according to Netanyahu. And Nikki Haley completely agrees with that it was a huge insult to abstain from the vote, to not even denounce the settlements.
Yeah.
So that's just, and there's really no, it is very interesting how many of those things he's reversing this quickly, but at the same time, I do think Trump, not that he was very malleable, but that he never really had a core ideology, really, ever. This is a guy we have to remember was attending that he was actually friends with Hillary and Bill Clinton. Not too long before he decided to start running as a Republican. If you listen to this, I don't know if you've heard it, this Howard Stern thing where he reveals a lot of stuff about Donald Trump, and he claims that Donald Trump asked Howard, "What would you think if I ran for president?" years before he actually did it. And Howard Stern was like, well, that's interesting. Like, what would be your platform? And then when Trump went on to explain he would be a Republican, Stern was like, no, I can't vote for you. He's like, but what are you doing? You're not a Republican. Like, why would you run as a Republican? He was like really confused of why Trump would do that. And I think Trump did it because he played on that opportunism that he saw how the right wing was getting so angry under Obama. And he swooped in there with that birth certificate press conference, raising that issue like a year or two after it really dropped out of the mainstream media's like attention span. He brought it back into the headlines again. And he actually compelled the White House to release the birth certificate. And I think I think that says a lot about what he really is politically, is that he's first and foremost an opportunist. So in terms of him being a master negotiator, I really think this was more just him just opportunistically changing positions when whatever positions he might have had were bringing too much heat towards him. They're not even really that important of positions. Even his détente with Russia, I mean, I don't even know how big of a position that was really for him. I mean, that one was weird because it did seem like he was taking a little bit of a risk to make that part of his campaign platform in the first place. So maybe he did really want that. But I mean, how badly did he really want it? I mean, obviously not that badly after we see what's happening now. Or this could all be, there's people who are suggesting it's a ruse to deflate the energy from the Russia, Trump collusion conspiracies. I don't even know if I buy that. I mean, I just don't think it was really that big of a platform for him to begin with. So,
well, no, on the Russia thing, because I did want to touch on this. Just yesterday, we had former acting Attorney General Sally Yates testifying to Congress on General Flynn and his ties to the Russian government, that he was a foreign agent. And here we are, we're right back to Russiagate, and that the Russians are really kind of behind everything. They're manipulating our elections. They were, heavily manipulating the French elections, but of course their candidate did not win. So I don't know quite how they I guess they just sort of dropped, they just sort of stopped talking about that. Russians were, France, it wasn't really all that bad, but here it was terrible. And I want to know your take on why are we even coming back to that? Because if they were using that, like, let's say Trump really was a Kremlin puppet or a Kremlin partner, let's say, and now, but the neocons and the deep state and the CIA and the establishment, all these groups have basically been able to sever most of the tangible ties between Trump and Putin, in that he's bombing Syria. He's totally on board with, we gotta go after China and this, that, and the other thing. So, why even bring up Michael Flynn? And the second part, because this seems like a sort of a slippery slope, because this is not a revelation that there are foreign agents, in Washington. Everybody in Washington is an agent of something else. Okay? Be they the Russians, the Turks, the Chinese, Israel, or the oil industry, or tobacco, arms manufacturers, Silicon Valley, or just that they're an agent of their dynastic political family, like the Clintons or the Podestas and whatever. Everyone is an agent. Do they really want to start going down that path? Because there's lots of Democrats that have very shady connections to all sorts of other countries. In I think probably a worse way or a more serious way than Flynn. Because how close is Flynn really to the Russians? Because, as you have routinely pointed out, Robbie, this guy wrote a fucking book with one of the biggest, nastiest neocon motherfuckers out there, Michael Ledeen. So, I mean, how anti-Russian could this guy really be? So what's your take on A, that we're going back to this, and in this, he's a foreign agent?
Well, I mean, I think that the Democrats they're not done with this, with this conspiracy theory. Anything they find, from here on out, they will try to, get as much media attention for it as they possibly can and use it like a weapon. So, I mean, if, Flynn, is only backing the equation because they think that that's going to somehow drive this narrative even further to the conclusion that they want it to go in, which at this point is, I don't think it's going to be impeachment. The only thing I can think of, the only motive for them to keep pushing on this is that they want to just continue to delegitimize Trump's presidency. And that might even just be in the framework of partisan revenge on their part. I mean, after all, and this is something that Daniel Wright brought up on a discussion we had I think it was on Media Roots, about how Team Obama was extremely horrified when Trump won. Even though Obama himself tried to play nice and acted like he was, peaceful transition of power, we have a new president now, that Team Obama underneath of him was scrambling in any way they could to delegitimize Trump once he got in office. And there is some truth to the idea that Obama was or Obama's people at least, were sort of putting together a narrative that then the Democrats could use once they got out of office. That, Trump was colluding with Russia. Even though at the same time you had people like James Clapper, saying that there was no evidence to suggest Russia-Trump collusion. And then Mike Morell, one of the craziest, Team Hillary guys there is, former CIA, who said we should kill Russians and Iranians covertly in Syria to punish them. He actually said there's a lot of smoke here, but there's no fire. There's not even a spark, not a candle, nothing. Like he emphasized how little actual evidence there was of actual Trump-Russia collusion. And that to me should be like the final verdict on if there's anything impeachable possible here. So I definitely don't think that's even has the possibility of happening over this Russia stuff. But it does bring up the question I raised earlier. It's like, why aren't the Democrats trying to impeach him or investigating him for his business connections and making sure there's no conflict of interest there? Like, that would be so much more real and actually like a legitimate line of inquiry. It would still seem like partisan revenge if the Democrats were in charge of it, but at least it would be something real. That they could get people from the other side of the aisle, perhaps, or even you or I to be like, yeah, you know what? Even though the Democrats are being total, sore losers, this is a legitimate thing they're trying to do. But no, it's totally, and I honestly don't know what purpose it's going to serve other than, it has a dual purpose. It's to delegitimize his presidency, but it also serves the purpose of something that you and I have been talking about for years, which is continuing to amp up this anti-Russian hysteria and these tensions. And that's, other than those two reasons, I don't understand why they keep pushing on this. And Mike Flynn, the whole thing about Mike Flynn is so weird to me because there are still tons of people in the alt-right and actually a lot of people I respect who think that Mike Flynn was going to be some anti-interventionist. Simply because he went to an RT party and didn't believe the original Gupta chemical weapons attack story. He didn't believe that Assad launched that attack. Other than those two things, those little maybe silver linings of hope, everything else about him is horrifying. Everything else about him. His foreign policy views, his views on Islam, his relationship to Michael Ledeen, I do not understand how anybody could have thought he would be some kind of instrumental figure to actually put forward Trump's anti-interventionist plans. It makes absolutely no sense. So now all of a sudden the guy replacing him is a neocon, says the alt-right. And that's kind of where we are now, and that's McMaster.
Yeah. Oh, I kept seeing this the other day when Yates is testifying, and even Trump said this. Oh, well, Obama, because there's these rumors that Obama warned him. I would fire Flynn if I were you.
Yeah.
And then it's, Obama hired him and gave him a security clearance. So, and it's like, but what does that even have to do with anything? If these things are true, Let's just say, if he's this, foreign agent and whatnot. So what? I mean, Obama's not president anymore. And I don't understand how, that's their retort is like, oh, well, Obama hired him, so,
yeah.
And shouldn't that make it even worse, And then, of course, they flip it around to, well, Obama is secretly a Muslim, and Obama is secretly working for the Muslim Brotherhood, and that's why he doesn't like Flynn, because Flynn is this, anti-Muslim crusader that's going to rid the world of radical jihadis everywhere. It devolves to such a level where there really almost is no argument to be had here. There's no reason to even get involved with when these alt-right people get into this sort of, circular logic. Because and again, it all comes back to, yeah, but guess what? At the end of the day, you picked this guy. This is the businessman. He's supposed to be smart and vetting people. I mean, clearly they didn't vet anybody. Because you would think, okay, even if there's nothing to this, there's enough that this is going to screw us down the line. Did nobody, ask Flynn, just take Flynn into another room, quietly be like, okay, what's going to bite us in the ass? What is did you do some lobbying work for the Russians? Did you not, admit to this? We have to know. They're not, and again, it's still, Flynn is a nut job. Totally off his rocker. I love the, McMaster now is the secret neocon that got in. What? So Trump just has then he's not in control? Is that what you're saying? I don't know. It's just sort of, and again, that whole thing with Yates the other day, it was just like political theater at its most basic. Everything she said was like a soundbite later that day for, all the major, news networks and all the late night guys,
Yeah.
And on Twitter, of the top 20 things trending, almost all of them were related to that. Sally Yates, Russians, Michael Flynn, James Clapper, Ted Cruz, Lindsey Graham, and Chuck Grassley. That was all anybody could talk about. Yesterday at work I had to hear all about it from this group coming in. Oh, and just Russians, this and that, and Yates was they were trying to warn him, and Trump didn't care because he's a Russian, and it's so bogus. Again, as you said, why are they not going after the business ties? Or you want to go after the Russians and Trump, well then just look at the Russian mob, because he's definitely connected to some of those people. That's something that even he will sort of admit to, giving office space to these shady, Russian quote unquote businessmen, with long rap sheets and stuff. That is real. They could go after that, but instead it's this, which I guess, as you were saying, Robbie, is great because all it really does is amplify this, we've got to fight the Russians. That they are this existential threat to the American way of life. And I guess we're coming up on the break, and we'll kind of finish off on the Russia stuff because then I want to get into Cernovich and Epstein and Eli Lake stuff. But your opinion, Robbie, do you see Trump kind of, finally kind of coming all the way around and maybe not denouncing Russia, but just sort of because why is he holding out? Even right now he's saying, oh, this isn't a big deal. Let's move on, fake news. There's other stuff to talk about. Is he going to carry that on forever, that the Russians are okay? Or do you think he's eventually going to just kind of come around and be like, okay, fine, I won't be so friendly to Vladimir?
I think it's pretty much guaranteed he's going to come around to the other side, and he's going to sound pretty much exactly like Hillary Clinton on Russia, and maybe even in a few months.
Right. Well, we're going to take a quick commercial break right now, but we'll be back with Robbie Martin to discuss a lot more and some really interesting stuff. So stay tuned.
mostly narcotics.
Freedom.
Oh, yes, I like very much.
Radio.
You're an American institution.
American Freedom Radio.
And I hope people support American Freedom Radio. And I hope people vote with their dollars and really understand the value of having American Freedom Radio. Because that's my family. If you love me at all, Jack Blood, support American Freedom Radio. Like, my family has literally disowned me. American Freedom Radio, Danny and Don and those guys, those are my actual family. So please support these guys because they have all the technology. They have all these great things that they're going to do. But obviously they can't do it all by themselves. So not only would I like to see you support them, I'd like to see you retweet them and repost them and really get involved and get on the bandwagon, so to speak, on doing that do-it-yourself promotion, because they're a do-it-yourself radio network, and we just need that so much.
Did you know there are 3 million edible food plants on Earth, and none have the nutritional value of the hemp plant? HempUSA.org offers you hemp protein powder. It does not contain chemicals or THC, is non-GMO, and is 100% gluten-free. Hemp protein powder burns fat, builds muscle, contains 53% protein, and feeds the body the nutrients it needs. Call 888-910-4367 and see what our powder, seeds, and oil can do for you. Only at HempUSA.org. HempUSA.org introduces 3 brand new detox formulations of microplant powder. Brain Fuel for depression, bipolar disorders, and stress. Total Care, anti-cancer agent that cleans the liver and organs and increases memory. Rejuvenate, invigorates and heals the body, mind, and spirit. These products are your alternative to pharmaceuticals. Call 888-910-4367 and like us on Facebook. We ship worldwide. Only at HempUSA.org.
This is Rick Simpson, and you're listening to American Freedom Radio.
What about show business? Show business, completely dishonest, corrupt, and full of shit, but in a nice way. Plenty of expensive drugs and perverted sex. If you're going to be full of shit, might as well enjoy your work. Then you have the media. Not just the news media, let's include them all. The media are almost literally exploding with bullshit because they're located right at the crossroads of all the other bullshit. The media are made up of equal parts advertising, politics, business, public relations, and show business. These people are sitting right at bullshit junction. There's enough bullshit in the media for Texas to open a branch office. And you still have enough left over to start 2 law firms and a Christian bookstore.
What has American Freedom Radio ever done for us?
Provide us with free education?
Well, that's obviously effective, but apart from reversing the dumbing down of America...
All the information they provide is free?
What about the free podium for broadcast activists to speak from, man?
Exploiting commonplace corruption?
They help vulnerable people who don't have a voice?
Bringing light to important information nobody else does.
Or they never censor, hang up, or cut off their guests? Well, that's no fun, is it?
Oh, they created a fantastic alternative media source during an era of bad, manipulative, and infiltrated mainstream and alternative media shows and scum.
Okay, well, apart from the free education, free information, free podium for broadcast activists to speak from, exposing commonplace corruption, helping vulnerable people without a voice, bringing light to important information nobody else does, and creating a fantastic commercial-free alternative media source in a sea of bad, manipulative mainstream and alternative media shills and scum, what has American Freedom Radio ever done for us?
Donate to American Freedom Radio today. No rules, no rules, no taboo topics, no taboo topics, no fear of doom, no fear of doom. We are American Freedom Radio, American Freedom Radio.
Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything: geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to Porkins Policy Radio. I am your host, Pierce Redmond. If you are just joining us right now here in the second hour, we are joined again by a good friend of the show, Robbie Martin. And in the first hour, Robbie and I were talking about the first 100 days of Trump, what we have seen, what has happened, and some of his reversals and whatnot. We were talking about, of course, the latest Russiagate story that popped up the other day when the former AG Sally Yates was testifying. And I wanted to, Robbie and I wanted to also talk about, I guess he's fast becoming, I think the person both of us just love to loathe. And that is the one and only dipshit Mike Cernovich. I'm sorry, I'm cursing a lot on today's episode. I'm sorry, dear listeners. But, Robbie, you were, I actually had to kind of take a bit of a hiatus from, following Mike Cernovich because he is such a toxic, nasty individual that if you spend too much time, reading his stuff and listening to his stuff, I mean, it just becomes, you get as angry and as like hyped and juiced up as that guy is all the time. So I did take a little bit of a break, but there is some interesting, some new developments. We will briefly touch on some of the Cernovich's connection to the Ghislaine Maxwell defamation suit with Virginia Wafiri, and his role in as acting as a proxy of Alan Dershowitz and most likely as a proxy of Donald Trump's as well. But I wanted to ask Robbie about Mike Cernovich's newest best friend, his bromance, I guess you could say, with your good friend Eli Lake. And I was actually kind of unaware of this until you pointed it out to me the other day. We were chatting on Twitter. So what is going on? Because this seems like an unlikely power couple, but a power couple nonetheless. So what is going on exactly, Robbie?
Well, it's very, very unusual. So there's a lot of, I guess, backstory to cover, but I'll try to make it short. So Eli Lake is a reporter working for Bloomberg now, very involved in sort of pushing neocon rhetoric under the Obama administration, writing articles that seemed like they were coming from Obama administration insiders who were trying to push against what Obama was trying to do, or trying to like push him into doing more aggressive foreign policy stuff. So for a long time his articles were like that, but they kind of started actually as puff pieces for the Obama administration. There's actually in one of the WikiLeaks dumps, in the Hillary email dumps, I'm not sure what these Hillary emails are actually from. These came out long before the DNC email leaks or the Podesta leaks, but nonetheless there are a bunch of emails you can search through from Hillary's time at the State Department. And when you type in Eli Lake's name into them, you find something from, I think, 2009, where he's telling Hillary's top staff guy, his name is Jake something, he's sending him an email saying, "You're welcome," in the body of the email. And it was basically a puff piece he had written about McFaul, that Eli Lake had written. And they were showing it he was sending it to the White House to sort of get like a little pat on the back for it and to show them that he had provided a service for Hillary Clinton in the State Department. So that's sort of where Eli Lake started, but then he later became like sort of an adversarial neocon journalist along with Josh Rogan and Jamie Kirchick, and they seem to be putting on a lot of talking points that came from the think tank that Jamie Kirchick worked for, which was the Foreign Policy Initiative, which was basically Project for the New American Century rebranded. And that's where they left off. But now, all of a sudden, now that Trump's in office, Eli Lake is writing sort of puff pieces about Trump. A little bit. I mean, they're definitely not adversarial towards Trump, and he seems to have new sources now, because whatever his old sources were that were Obama insiders are probably gone now. And his new sources are telling him a lot of the same things that I was talking about in the first hour, about how it's McMaster who's actually a neocon, and the deep state. He agrees with this narrative too. The deep state is trying to remove people from the Trump administration who could stand sort of in their way, like to accomplish some of his neocon goals. So Eli Lake himself is even tapping into sort of that conspiratorial narrative a little bit. He even said that this is not like a democracy, this is a banana republic in a recent article. And I was like, what am I reading? This is Eli Lake?
Yeah.
And also, interestingly, Eli Lake's girlfriend, Rosie Gray, wrote about the alt-right before I had even heard of it. She was one of the earliest writers and sort of people putting out information about the alt-right back when she was doing stuff for BuzzFeed. I think she still does BuzzFeed. But she's also written a lot of anti-Russia stuff that, agitated a lot of the new Cold War, sort of propaganda machinery. But Eli Lake, who's this very, respected by a lot of people still, journalist who writes for Bloomberg, is now essentially writing almost virtually identical narratives and articles to Mike Cernovich, seemingly based on the same leaks coming from the White House, the same insider leaks. And even in one instance, Cernovich was extremely butthurt and angry at Eli Lake and for acting like Eli Lake got the scoop first when Cernovich actually released his story a day earlier, saying the same stuff. So he was basically saying, Eli, like, we need to do this together. Like, obviously, he wrote an article, and Mike Cernovich writes all his articles in the third person. So this one was actually even creepier because he was like, Mike Cernovich was literally writing an article saying, Mike Cernovich and Eli Lake should become friends. Like, this is the actual wording in it. Like, why don't these two guys become friends? And I was just like, what the fuck did he write this? It took me a while to figure out that he even wrote it because it's so weird to read something in the third person like that. But he's asking Eli Lake to be his friend, but he's already basically asserting that Eli Lake is working from the same sources, and that Cernovich is actually getting even better access to this source. And this is all coming on the heels of Mike Cernovich tweeting out a picture from the White House press podium in the press pool.
Yes.
Him standing behind it, making that, stupid 4chan Pepe OK symbol, with Cassandra Fairbanks, an ex-We Are Change journalist who used to hang out with an FBI snitch, Brandon Darby, who actually entrapped two men for trying to build a pipe bomb at a protest years ago. So this is some very weird things happening here. And of course the entire press and mainstream media, their reaction to that photo wasn't any of the things I had just told you. It was, that's a secret racist hand signal. Trump has white supremacists in the White House. And it's like, oh my God, you're missing the entire, there's so much more of an interesting story here. And then everybody's still debating about that OK hand signal. I mean, come on. 4chan are master trolls. I'll give them that.
Yeah.
Let's let go of this one for now.
Just classic distraction, getting all, I saw it. I mean, they're getting so bent out of shape over whether or not the hand signal was racist. And all they did was they just fueled Cernovich's, you see, they're all out to get me because I know the secret, hidden truths, and I've got all these, sources and things. And it does make you wonder, does he have sources? Because some of this stuff is come on, dude, we can all read the tea leaves politically. His, they're gonna bomb Syria and all these, it was it's not that crazy. Okay, some of his breaking stories are what are you, the only fucking person out there that, can understand politics? You know? And I mean, maybe he does, but you do wonder, does he have a source? And if he does, I mean, where did he acquire this source? And,
let me just interject here with this idea that, back to what I was saying about how the White House is in some way using the alt-right media circuit as their instrument. I think this could be, as crazy as it may sound, that Mike Cernovich has a White House leaker feeding him information. I mean, how crazy is that really, considering that Alex Jones gets phone calls from Trump on a weekly basis? Like, I mean, they were even given press passes in the first place. Like, there's a C-SPAN video of Cernovich yelling at other people in the press pool. Like, he appeared at a Spicer press conference. I mean, like, that blows my freaking mind. It's like, how is this reality right now? This is like, sorry.
Well, and Robbie, just to be clear, was Cernovich saying, you know, when he was reaching, do you think he was serious when he was reaching out to Eli Lake? Like, let's work together?
I think he's such an immature man-child that I think it was like his ego was hurt, that Eli Lake was acting like he was releasing these scoops, but in fact, Cernovich was arguing at least one of them came from him first. So he was mad that Eli Lake wasn't giving him credit, and that Eli Lake was essentially like ignoring his existence. So it was kind of like, you know, it wasn't like, Eli, like, give me credit where it's due. It was like, I want to do this with you. I want to like be your bud. And I don't know, you know, he's kind of like Gavin, he probably is inspired by people like Gavin McGinnis. So a lot of this could just be like performative, like, you know, like sarcasm. I don't know if he was sincere, but no, the article is essentially wanting him to be his friend. I don't even know if Cernovich gives a crap if he about Eli Lake's neocon history. I just don't even think he's aware of it. Yet yet Cernovich is constantly talking about neocons now as if he understands, you know, the whole.
Well, he doesn't. Yeah, he wouldn't know a neocon if it, you know, came up and kicked him in the nuts. No, of course. I mean, and you know, it's funny too. Cernovich lately is the little bit that I could stomach the past day or so looking at, you know, he sort of stopped with the deep state stuff. You know, that's no longer really the threat. You know, now that we're back to it's Obama and the Muslims, and you know, he sort of dropped that, or it's the neocons. You know, it's not the deep state anymore. Now it's just specifically the neocons. They are the real threat. You know, and as you were saying in the first hour, you know, McMaster. You know, he's everywhere. Blah blah blah. But it does. I do wonder though. If Cernovich would actually have any problems allying himself with Eli Lake, because he totally, you know, whether he wants to admit it or not, allied himself with his hero, Alan Dershowitz, well after it was public knowledge that Dershowitz was, you know, helped out Jeffrey Epstein get out of serious jail time, and may have even been implicated himself with having sex with an underage girl. And Cernovich had no problem knowing all of that, going and interviewing him for his, you know, his wonderful free speech movie. And that kind of brings us around to, you know, what's going on vis-a-vis this lawsuit that Virginia Guafieri, who used to be known as Virginia Roberts, she is suing Ghislaine Maxwell for defamation. And as I've mentioned it several times on the show, and I think you've even mentioned it as well on Media Roots with Abby on a recent episode, that Cernovich has, of course, inserted himself into that case. And he is, you know, attempting to unseal some documents. And I'll just say this right now. So the judge in the case, Robert Sweet, has just denied Cernovich's, you know, recent motion to unseal Maxwell's summary judgment to dismiss the complaint of plaintiff Virginia Guafieri. Let that sink in, because I don't know if people were, maybe I didn't explain it well enough before. What Cernovich wants to get, because he's so concerned about the pedophiles, what he wants to unseal is the summary judgment of a woman who was a madam for Epstein, but what he wants to unseal is her saying how this never happened. So what is in there? You know, this is not, you know, he's not trying to like unseal the documents that prove this all happened. What he's trying to do is unseal the documents that say this didn't happen. Which is Keep that in mind, because of course on his website he spins this like he is all about the truth and blah blah blah. What he wants is to unseal is a despicable woman's own testimony claiming that this 15-year-old girl that she definitely 100% knew intimately well is a liar or a slut.
Yeah.
And you have to wonder, what does Maxwell say? And, is there something on Trump? Is there something on Dershowitz? Is there, what is she saying in there that Cernovich wants to get so badly? Okay? Because that's the thing. He spins this like he's doing this for Guaffiri. But what? He's trying to publicize, the words of a woman who's claiming that she's a liar.
Yeah.
Now, so keep that in mind when this blowhard goes on and on and on about how he's all against the pedos and stuff. Thankfully, Robert Sweet denied Cernovich's latest motion, and I'll link up in the show notes to his actual, what he filed, what the Judge Robert Sweet filed, because it's actually really good, and he lays out how Cernovich's entire legal argument for why it should be released is complete BS. He really, he cites these awful cases that have almost nothing to do with why Cernovich wants these particular documents released. And he also just sort of, he talks about the fact that, this case is about to go to trial. we can't be releasing stuff to some internet troll so he can, plaster it all over his website. This case is about to go to trial. You can't have that stuff sort of out there. They're picking jury members and stuff. And an update for people that are interested, the trial was set to begin next Monday, May 15th. But I just checked when we were in between on the break, and it seems that there was some sort of a telephone conference call between several of the parties involved, and now everything is being moved to May 25th. And there were some rumors that there might have been a deal in the works. I don't think that's really happening. I think they're going to move forward. And I don't think Guaffiri would take a deal at this point. I think she wants to see Maxwell, go to jail. And I think this is also why, Cernovich is pushing as hard as he can. And he's trying to, attach himself to interestingly to the New York Post and the New York Daily News, as well, that have also been trying to get some of these documents out. And he's trying to sort of hitch his wagon there. But, Robbie, this has always been this, the most sort of fascinating part of, when you look into Cernovich and his motives and stuff, and the fact that he has, inserted himself as an intervener in this lawsuit.
Yeah.
What's your take on this? Because again, this gets no play. He had a couple articles out talking about this, and I don't want to say that it was, because of me, but I definitely hounded him about the wording of some of his articles where he appeared to be either calling Virginia Guaffiri the victim, a madam, or he was trying to pass off documents that she entered as to why Cernovich shouldn't be trusted, and tried to pass those off as Maxwell's, even though what he wants to do is unseal Maxwell's documents saying that she's a liar. And I know his lawyers know who I am because I've emailed back and forth with the two guys that are defending him in the trial. Mark Randazza, who's a real washed up scumbag, and this is his big. This is going to change his life, and also J. Marshall Wallman, who is the part of Randazza's legal group out in Connecticut, who's actually representing Cernovich down in the Southern District here in New York. So I know they know who I am, and I did ask them about this whole when Cernovich makes his assertion about the accused madam, and Randazza's saying, "Oh, we have no input over the editorial process." Even though his client is, and after this email exchange, Cernovich has been quieter on what's going on with this. So, Robbie, what do you make of it?
Well, I didn't even know any of this existed until you told me about it. So, I guess my initial impression of it was, well, obviously on some level, he is, he's opportunistically pushing Pizzagate and, trying to make a huge deal out of that, while trying to hide something having to do with Dershowitz and maybe even that goes back to Trump somehow. But then it just kind of got me thinking about, then the larger idea, is Pizzagate deliberately being steered to basically make it so that even if something with Epstein and Trump comes out, it's never able to eclipse the narrative of Pizzagate, because it's so crazy that Hillary and Podesta's and all the Democrats are like sex, satanic, child rapists, occultists, compared to maybe Trump got a hand job from a 15-year-old at one of Epstein's resorts. Like, if that ever came out or something like that, it was like really credible, then I almost feel like that could be what Pizzagate's purpose was. I mean, that sounds almost, it's like a conspiracy in a conspiracy, but that's kind of where my head went with it. But then I started looking into Cernovich and Dershowitz a little more deeply, and I noticed that one of Cernovich's earliest, the way I heard of Cernovich was from a completely different angle of this whole alt-right ideological movement, if you even want to call it that, reactionary movement, where he was trying to spin this narrative, and he was going around actually to a lot of I wouldn't say alt-right, but New York comedy scene, he kind of I heard of him through the New York comedy scene, because people who had known Gavin McInnes, there's a podcast called Race Wars that's actually they bring on people from Red Eye on Fox News sometimes, but it's not like an alt-right podcast, but it's very unfiltered. There's a lot of they'll make racial jokes and do things maybe some podcasts in LA wouldn't do, kind of thing. But there is a kind of relationship that there always has been a little bit with the alt-right in that regard. So I guess they had, heard of Mike Cernovich way earlier than I had heard of him as someone who was an important, Milo-style guy or whatever. And they brought him on, and he was coming on to talk about his movie Silenced, which was the narrative of the movie is that right-wing thought, aspects of right-wing's beliefs were being censored nationwide in America. That not through censorship laws, but through our social climate, whatever you want to call it, you can't be racially insensitive or you're automatically called a racist. It was coming from that direction, but it was interviewing people, most of them who had said things, insensitive things about rape, race, all right-wing things, and showing this narrative that it's only the right wing that's censored. Comedians who make jokes about, black people are under threat. They can have their jobs, destroyed because of the liberal bias in society. And in this documentary, he had Alan Dershowitz, and he was presenting Alan Dershowitz as a similar figure who had been falsely accused as a smear tactic to ruin his career, along with Kurt Metzger, New York comedian, and all these other different people. So I thought that was fascinating, because that's to me, that's still happening and now it's diverted into the college campus thing now. Now they've taken it all the way to this is anti-free speech if you don't want Ann Coulter to come to UC Berkeley to do a talk. And they're trying to act the left is anti-free speech and all this stuff. So I feel like he's always been an agitator in that regard. He's an opportunistic agitator. He's not, I don't even really see him as an ideologue. I see that he's a tool for these certain more alt-right people like Bannon. And also he does seem to have an unlimited supply of funds. And I don't think he made that through his investments or being a lawyer. He even admitted recently that he paid $5,000 to get people to show up at this last Berkeley protest where Ann Coulter didn't even show up, and he was mad that nobody showed up for him, or that barely any of the people he paid showed up. So he just got $5,000 to blow on hiring protesters He's released a book that's not cheap to do either. I think it's self-published. And there's just a lot of other strange things about where he gets his money. So I wonder also, is someone like Robert Mercer funding Cernovich somehow? You know, what's going on here? Because he's not just a guy who sprung up out of nowhere because he's got some really good ideas. I mean, none of these ideas are even original. He's mostly repeating other things from other alt-right people anyway. So, I'm very curious about why he's in the position he is, and I mean, sort of in a larger way. But I do think he is somehow covering up for this Epstein thing. I mean, and that's a little more confusing to explain.
Oh, definitely, and again too. I mean, he chooses an interesting case to get involved with, because this one does definitely touch on Donald Trump. In more ways than one, I think. You know, because there's a straight up lawsuit against Epstein. Like, you know, keep in mind too, the case that we're referring to here, Epstein is not a defendant. You know, he's just a respondent in this case. So it's not against him.
Which case are we talking about right now?
This is the defamation suit that Cernovich has inserted himself into. It's between Virginia Guafieri suing Ghislaine Maxwell. Epstein is not, I mean, he's named in it, but she's not going after him specifically. Yeah. She's going after Maxwell. Whereas there is another case also in the Southern District of New York, with Jane Doe, I think it's 73, where she is suing, you know, Epstein and Maxwell and a whole bunch of, you know, Sarah Kellen, Malia Shev, a bunch of other women that were like her case is about sexual trafficking. You know, it is that Epstein was running a sex trafficking enterprise that she was forced into. You know, he's not going after that. No, instead he's going after a defamation suit, and all he wants is for the woman who's at the center of this, he wants the stuff that she said that claims this is all false. That's what he wants to put out there. And again, this was a 15-year-old girl that worked in Mar-a-Lago in the towel check for $9 an hour, and whose father worked at Mar-a-Lago, and Trump definitely knew who she was. And you can say, that's crazy, but, you know, I spoke with a journalist, Jose Lambia, from Gossip Extra. You can go to that episode and listen to it. This guy is from Palm Beach. He covers, you know, Palm Beach, Miami, as a gossip tabloid, but he does some really good stuff on the Epstein stuff. And he said, believe me, he knows Trump may not know them by name, but he knows by face every person that works for him at his resorts. So he definitely knew who Virginia Guafieri was, and he definitely knew what his friend Jeffrey Epstein was getting up to. And this is the case that Cernovich decides to insert himself into. Not a case and the other case is like way easier to prove. You know, I mean, if you read the criminal complaint in that, I mean, it is all there, and it names names. If you want to know the intimate details of Epstein's whole thing, follow that case. The Maxwell one is, you know, everything is sealed, and it's a lot of, you know, he said, she said, back and forth. So, but going back again with Cernovich, because, you know, I want to, we were talking, the other day, we were sort of figuring out what we wanted to get into with this. And Cernovich has now been elevated to a fairly high he was at the fucking White House. Okay. I mean, he's not nobody anymore. He's not just some internet blogger, or, you know, troll on Periscope, ranting and raving. He has money at his disposal. He has influence to get White House press credentials. Apparently he's got, you know, insider White House sources. He's got, he's somehow funding this, legal strategy. And you know, he was just on Alex Jones, in studio, not that recently.
With Paul Joseph Watson. Yeah.
Yeah, with Paul Joseph Watson.
Who coincidentally is also now writing stories from White House leaks. So.
Yes. So, I mean, what is going on there, Robbie? Because this, and I found it very interesting. Cernovich does his first live, because I think he had been on InfoWars a few times, but he did his first live appearance on InfoWars just before the performance artist child custody stuff happened, where Jones has definitely been taken down a few rungs of the ladder, and Cernovich has continued to, climb up that ladder. So, I mean, what's going on there, Robbie?
That's a really fascinating question. I actually, when I was watching that, I was thinking, is Alex Jones shopping for a replacement? Like in case he's taken down, and somehow his organization remains intact. Yeah, I mean, cause I think Alex Jones, he might die from death by 1,000 cuts, meaning that if he's already getting sued, he already had to issue a bizarre apology to James L. Fontes. He continues to double down on saying James L. Fontes has nothing to do with it. Nice guy. He has nothing to do with that stuff, folks. But the Podesta stuff, that's a whole other story. I mean, he'll keep emphasizing that now on his newer shows. So that I definitely think he was really close to getting a severe lawsuit that could have taken his whole organization down there. And he's also getting sued by a yogurt company right now, Chobani Yogurt Company, because he basically blamed them for a bunch of rapes, saying that they hire refugees and they raped a bunch of people. So he goes all over the place now. I mean, he doesn't realize that maybe in the past he could go on these funny conspiracy tangents and just pontificate about things, but when you include things like the refugees are going to rape everybody and things like that, I think it's definitely lawsuit territory. So I have a feeling, and I have mixed feelings about this, because I think Alex Jones should obviously have the right to do what he does. I don't think in any way his speech should be censored. But just like what happened to Gawker, when Peter Thiel was allegedly funding all these lawsuits against Gawker, including the Hogan lawsuit, Nick Denton, the Gawker owner, said that no media outlet could have survived sustained assault of lawsuits like that, that were being basically infinitely bankrolled by somebody, which is an abnormal circumstance. So if a powerful enough oligarch, if a powerful enough power faction in the U.S. wanted to take Alex Jones down that way, they could. I mean, they really could. And that's the unfortunate reality of the capitalist, system we live in, where we have billionaires who could, basically buy out media outlets if they wanted to, like Bezos buying the Washington Post. So, I don't know what the deal is with that. And I kind of got off on a tangent about Cernovich replacing Alex Jones, which would be a weird. Or
maybe he was going to become the new Joe Biggs. That was sort of what I thought. That this was sort of, cause I could see, cause Cernovich has got that, Joe Biggs kind of, dickhead, macho kind of mentality. And who knows, what happened to Joe Biggs, He definitely signed some sort of non-disclosure agreement when he started work at InfoWars, and it isn't talking about it now. Well, here's my other thing too, Robbie, is this is something that you had, you kind of mentioned to me, earlier the other day, is the way that Cernovich is also seems to be the kind of the anointed emissary of alt-right propaganda, but always channeled by the establishment. So he's done 60 Minutes, most recently, which was, why would they even allow him to, you know what I mean? You're just elevating him. I just don't understand why you would want to give him a platform. I mean, they had to know what was going to happen. And they had to know that no interview that 60 Minutes does is ever in its broadcast in its entirety.
Absolutely.
So they knew that this is this guy lives for that. Anything we cut out, Cernovich is the type of person, listen to this, and you didn't see this, and look at that. See, it is fake news, because they're censoring me. They're manipulating what I was saying. Again, not really understanding, this is how news media works. They're always doing that. You're never going to see a full, interview somewhere.
Yeah.
It's like, wake up, dude. But same thing, New Yorker does a profile on him. New York Magazine can't stop talking about him. So they're elevating him and, of course, amplifying his whole message. So,
yep.
I mean, what do you make of that, Robbie? How much is that relationship, like, give and take, or, because I wonder, to the extent that Cernovich may or may not be aware of this, is something, is somebody pulling his strings? Is he just, because to me he seems like he must know on some level that the mainstream media, the fake news, is promoting him.
Absolutely.
On some level, he has to understand that they are doing that. And he seems like the kind of guy who really only cares about himself. And is kind of fine with that. Sure, I don't mind that my sworn enemy is helping me. I'll use that.
Well, look at the other people I think there's two other examples that can be looked at of the other times the media have propped out alt-right people. One of them was Milo, and they tried to destroy him by showing how racist he was, or how vile he was, and how much of like a performance artist he was, trying to upset people. I think ultimately that backfired on them, and they actually made him way more popular. And in the end, he sort of won out until that video of him talking about getting molested by a priest came out. Mm-hmm. And that was just like pure luck, I think. I'm surprised that didn't come out earlier, but that was just sort of, I don't think that the media was doing, when they were propping him up, it was just actually having the reverse effect. But I think they learned from that mistake, and instead they started propping up someone like Richard Spencer, to whether it was fair or not. And I think maybe in some ways it wasn't fair, but I can understand why they did it. I mean, a lot of people I respect still do this, is prop up Richard Spencer as being like, well, the alt-right is very strongly white supremacist, or it's even neo-Nazi in this larger sense, because Richard Spencer has all this influence. And I think that the media succeeded in doing that by raising up someone like Richard Spencer, because now that is sort of the narrative where it's like, oh, the alt-right is, sort of more racist than the traditional right. They're more actual linked to neo-Nazism and sort of this racial purity and stuff like that. And I think that the reason they're propping up Cernovich is because he does resemble Alex Jones in a lot of ways. He is a blowhard. He is opportunistically jumping to all these different aspects of the alt-right to capture energy for his own, little media empire, or whatever he likes to call it. And they know that if they raise someone who's sort of dumb and egocentric and irresponsible in the way they deliver information, then they could just be really easy to knock down. And in some regards, some of the things he's saying, he's capturing energy from the anti-neocon, anti-interventionist side of things, the anti-war movement. So he said, he'll throw out a lot of anti-Syrian intervention rhetoric on Twitter, and a lot of people that I respect will retweet him sometimes, and I'm like, I don't understand how you can be into this guy, but apparently he's somehow reaching across the aisle and I guess fooling people into thinking that he's pointing out good anti-interventionist rhetoric. And I think that that's part of also why the media is propping him up, so that when there's an anti-interventionist rally, after Trump bombed Syria, then they could show Richard Spencer and Cernovich as the people at the march, hands off Syria. From the alt-right, it's Richard Spencer and Cernovich who are doing it. Nobody, they don't have to. It's nobody on the left who cares about this. It's the alt-right. And the alt-left is now what the media is trying to do, and pundits are trying to do, to basically conflate the alt-right and people on the far left, which is another really dishonest ploy that's being employed. And I actually see people trying to do it with Cassandra Fairbanks, because she came from Occupy and sort of the left side of the truth movement into the right side of it. And they're propping her up for a similar reason. And it's very fascinating. But yeah, I do think that their media thinks they can basically make other people look stupid by propping Mike Cernovich up, essentially.
Yeah. Well, and I think on some level that it does succeed if you are able to somehow equate hands-off Syria anti-war movement with this nasty, rape apologist, Mike Cernovich, then yeah, I mean, you do hurt those people. Or you are able to be like, oh, you see, really, anti-war is really this sort of, code for right-wing nationalism and
exactly.
Stuff. Yeah. That's really what they're about. It's not, they don't truly, are opposed to this. And of course it works well, especially given that apparently, all the liberals in the media and political punditry, think that Trump is really presidential when he's dropping bombs on people. That somehow makes him, I mean, I'm sure you saw what's this, Van Jones or something? He was practically having an orgasm.
Oh, he was crying,
Trump. Yeah, I mean, and he's just one of many, he's so presidential. Why? Because he, ordered the military to drop bombs on some city? When that
literally came up with a racist acronym. And that's what Van Jones was crying right after he said voice was for the immigration, it was going to be an immigration crimes bulletin, basically. That's what, and then Van Jones was crying at that Navy SEAL's wife being shown at the State of the Union. It's that's horrific, but sorry.
Yeah. No, and I mean, again, when Trump is bombing Syria or any of these other military action, all of the other, political pundits, they all fall in the line. Oh, he's great now. He's wonderful. And if you are anti-war, then you're racist or you're a Russian agent, you're like Mike Cernovich. And that's so depressing too, because Cernovich doesn't really care. If you listen to him try to talk about, why we shouldn't bomb Syria, I mean, he doesn't have a real answer. He actually sounds like Trump. He's like, we don't want this, this is terrible, we don't need this, the deep state, and, I'm making fun of his little list, because I know him, I'm sure that is a big disappointment to him, that the guerrilla mindset has a, Lispovich. But, but he has no real, there's no, intellectual basis to it. He doesn't even use the, this is morally wrong. He just says, we don't want this, America first, and, and he just, and he gets so sort of worked up all the time. I mean, that's why his periscopes are just, it's who can sit there for 6 hours, listen to this guy rant and rave? And then he just drops it too. He's not talking about Syria now, I mean, what his last articles on his site were just all about McMaster. Even that McMaster is the one that's probably going to want to bomb more of these countries. It's just that McMaster is bad.
Well, I mean, I think it kind of goes back to the Tea Party, like I brought up earlier, that I think once people like InfoWars and some of these other Patriot Movement, truther media outlets started to attach themselves to the post-co-opted Tea Party movement and broaden their audience, to include promoting people like Ted Cruz, and even InfoWars was running articles promoting Sarah Palin after the 2008 race when she became more trendy in the Tea Party. And I think it creates the fundamental problem where it's already that movement was on very faulty ground in the sense that, there is already inherent contradictions in the Ron Paul libertarianism, anti-war morality with some of the other anarcho-capitalist, capitalism aspects of libertarianism. So, and then there's even more contradictions when you add on Alex Jones's own beliefs. So there's already a lack of real intellectual conviction to begin with, moral conviction, when you mix those together already, but then you zoom out even further when you include things like the more broad co-opted Tea Party movement audience with that, and then the intellectual backing for being anti-war becomes even more diluted. I mean, then it does just become this selfish, more generic, even going back to certain aspects of fascism, rooted forms of right-wing nationalism that we don't need to do anything in any other countries. We don't need to help them, but we also don't want to like waste our resources attacking them, or it's coming from a place of economic nationalism and essentially selfishness. It's wrong to hurt other people in other countries for no reason if we're not attacked. That's not where it's coming from. So, and then it really hasn't been coming from that place in this sort of right-wing anti-war movement, putting it in quotes, for the last, 7-8 years, really. When was the last time you heard someone who's in the alt-right talk about it from a moral perspective that we shouldn't be bombing another country? It doesn't seem like that ever comes into the equation. So, it really is easy then to boost someone like Cernovich as this face of the anti-Syrian intervention movement or whatever, and be like, look, everyone who's anti-Syrian intervention is a moron who has like really no concrete, logical framework for why they are anti-intervention. Their points can be knocked down really easily.
Oh yeah, and just when you were talking, like, Robbie, with the economic argument, that's what they'll use, economic nationalism, which of course begs the question of, well, so if war was really good, for the working class, would it be okay then? If war benefited economic nationalism, then you'd be in favor of it. It's such a hollow argument. Especially when just the sort of moral argument of like, it's not okay to go and butcher people in some, far off country in the Middle East because, Lockheed Martin wants you to do it. That's a really terrible reason, and that's so sound, that's so easy to articulate. And that's one of those things that I think most people are actually in agreement with. Even the people that sort of go along with war can still be like, yeah, it is morally wrong. It's not something I'm comfortable with, but you gotta support the troops or whatever. But it's such an easier way to kind of go about that. Well, we're kind of coming up towards the end here, Robbie, and I've mentioned before on the show, I'm reading this book, Aberration in the Heartland of the Real: The Secret Lives of Timothy McVeigh by Wendy S. Painting. And it's an amazing book. I really recommend it to everybody. But, a huge section of the book is obviously devoted to conspiracy theories, of which McVeigh was, a very, he was part of the conspiracy culture. And, and like right-wing, the sort of militia movement, the patriot movement, all of those sorts of things. And of course all the, these different factors involved in all that. But, and through a whole series of events, obviously, many of them manipulated or controlled, you did get things like the Oklahoma City bombing. Now, I don't think that the time that we're in right now is completely, works as an analogy for in the 90s, but there is this rising right-wing movement. And while I think the vast majority of them are not necessarily racist, the people, kind of, and this is something that Painting talks about in her book, quoting from other people as well, but that the underlying current with that movement was that, the most people were just sort of didn't like the government, or they were, pro Second Amendment, but they were slowly kind of like yoked in to being racist because the people that were pushing these movements were in fact, racialists. Their political ideology was based on race, and that resulted in some really horrible events. And we were sort of talking off air during the break, about this sort of fascism coming into place. And you were sort of talking from a 9/11 style thing. I know this is hard to sum up in like 5-10 minutes, but what do you make of that idea? I mean, of the idea of like something on a right-wing scale, because it does seem like there are a lot of the pieces kind of in place already. There has been this sort of resurgence, or at least, acceptance of certain factions of the Patriot. They've kind of taken a hit, like David Duke isn't, praising Trump anymore, but he was. And I could see a way where, and maybe that's what they want. They want to become disappointed. That was so much of the Patriot movement was like, ex-soldiers. They loved the government and everything until they sort of saw that, how horrible the Gulf War was. And then they were manipulated. So what do you make of that, given that we're sort of there are some similarities between those two times right now?
Well, that's a really interesting question. The paranoia against the government, I don't think will ever cease to be. I mean, I think Pizzagate was one outlet for a lot of the right-wing paranoia to go, maybe only temporarily. So I think at some point, I do think that certain aspects of the right wing, and because there are, we don't really hear about the actual militia movements and the patriot movements much anymore. It seems like it's all more blended together now. But I am very curious. I wonder what the climate is just among those holdouts, like the actual survivalists, like more right-wing militia people, the actual racialists and neo-Nazi groups who are like preparing for Armageddon and those kinds of people. Where's their political barometer at right now? I honestly don't know. So I guess I can only judge from like the wider climate, like the way the alt-right is acting, the way the internet, like the 4chan alt-right stuff and all that kind of stuff. So just from seeing that, I don't know if I think it doesn't seem like it's as bad as the 90s to me, I guess. Because in the 90s there seemed to be a lot more propaganda being thrown at us even about like right-wing militia culture. It was kind of like a rip from the headlines thing you would see on a lot of TV shows even, kind of on a regular basis. And even eco-terrorists, were a bigger deal even in the 90s. So I don't know. I guess my mind mostly goes to like, something like an ISIS terrorist attack, something that they could blame on ISIS here in the United States that would kill a lot of people, would be a bigger spark for a reaction from the right wing. And that might just cause like, chaos among the right wing on like a wider scale or something. Like, violence in neighborhoods where people might start like going on like hunts against Muslims and stuff in their neighborhoods, like Oath Keeper type people. And that's kind of where my mind goes when I think of what can happen with the right wing, I suppose.
No, I agree as well. And I think it's more just that, I think that's fun an excuse to talk about, Wendy Painting's book. But, it did strike me because at that time in the 90s was when like conspiracy culture really kind of like went to the next level, and became this sort of like Wild West territory where it was mainstream enough that people had to talk. Whereas now it's funny. I mean, like I was having a conversation with some friends, literally last night. And, and of course it somehow got around to conspiracy theories and everybody was, kind of like conspiracy theory has really lost all meaning at this point. And, and now it's sort of like fake news. That's the new buzzword. And there's, the fake news and the not fake news. And that's sort of, I guess, like taken the place of conspiracy culture. Now we're in fake news culture. And, it'll be interesting to see, but almost, with the conspiracy stuff, I feel like they were so much more invested in it. Whereas now, with people like Cernovich, he doesn't really care. Trump could come out and say, I was sleeping with little girls in Mar-a-Lago that Epstein was providing. He'd be like, whatever. It's okay. It's fine. Cause, anyway, we'll end right there. Robbie Martin, thank you so much for joining us. Quickly tell everybody where they can go to listen to your work.
They could go to MediaRoots.org to hear my podcast with Abby Martin, which we release about every week. They could go to averyheavyagenda.com to check out my documentary series, A Very Heavy Agenda, about the neocons. And they could follow me on Twitter at Fluorescent Gray.
Excellent, excellent. And we will be coming back to you next week with much more. And thank you all for listening.
News and information you can trust. This is American Freedom Radio. Freedom, American Freedom Radio. American Freedom Radio.
And I hope people support American Freedom Radio. And I hope people vote with their dollars and really understand the value of having American Freedom Radio. Because that's my family. If you love me at all, Jack Blood, support American Freedom Radio. Like, my family has literally disowned me. American Freedom Radio, Danny and Don and those guys, those are my actual family. So please support these guys because they have all the technology. They have all these great things that they're going to do, but obviously they can't do it all by themselves. So not only would I like to see you support them, I'd like to see you retweet them and repost them and really get involved and get on the bandwagon, so to speak, on doing that do-it-yourself promotion, because they're a do-it-yourself radio network, and we just need that so much.
Nutritious food is real body armor. It builds muscle, burns fat, improves digestion, and feeds the entire body the nutrients it needs. Did you know the U.S. government banned the hemp plant from growing in the United States and classified it as a Schedule I drug to hide it behind the marijuana plant? People have been confused about this plant for over 80 years, and many still don't know what hemp is. So now you know hemp is not marijuana, and marijuana is not hemp. They are different varieties of the same species. HempUSA.org wants the world to know these basic facts and to help people understand that hemp protein powder is the best kept health secret you need to know about. Remember, hemp protein powder contains 53% protein, is gluten-free, anti-inflammatory, non-GMO, and is loaded with nutrients. Call 888-910-4367, 888-910-4367, and see what our powder, seeds, and oil can do for you. Only at HempUSA.org.
This is Rick Simpson, and you're listening to American Freedom Radio.